underway. Welcome everyone to this first Dunedin City Council meeting of 2024. We will open the meeting with a prayer from Mr. Peter Small of the Dunedin Interfaith Council. Welcome to the chair.
Kia tātou, no Dargi Buddhist Centre, aho, Peter Small. Compassion is the driver of spiritual progress, and compassion is born from awareness of suffering. I wanted to give a little bit of context to this prayer of compassion, and in the Buddhist worldview we have the concept of hell, and as well as the suffering in hell, there's a problem because you don't have the ability to have compassion because you're so overcome by the suffering in hell. And there's similar difficulties with heaven as well. You're so enamoured and drunk with the power and esteem and enjoyment of heaven, you don't experience suffering, and so you don't develop compassion. And compassion is really the basis of Buddhist progress. And Buddhists are a little bit sort of almost notorious in the world for being atheists, not believing in God. You know, what we do worship, though, is the teachings of the Buddha. And the teachings of the Buddha talk about how all things are sort of temporary atoms, just created by causes and conditions. Even our bodies, slightly more sophisticated causes and conditions, and even our minds created by causes and conditions from our infinite past lives and our connection with all beings in the universe as a result of that. So that is what we venerate, and we also venerate the teachings, like public mental health teachings that the Buddha's teachings encapsulate about how to maintain an equanimity and a presence with people, so that you are there for people in the moment, not too concerned about your hopes and fears for the future, not too sort of prideful or worrying about what's happened in the past, but actually being there for people when you are there. So this prayer is its origins are about the 8th century AD in India from a great Buddhist called Shantideva, and the glorious 5th Dalai Lama, who had the Potala built and sort of developed the modern state that we know of as Tibet, put this together, and then the 14th Dalai Lama we're aware of today put it into the form that it is now. May all beings everywhere, plagued by suffering of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of our good deeds. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be free. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, ngā mihi nui. So we have a password circulating for DBAG guest, and we have 2 speakers for public forum. So I welcome Diane Yeldon, firstly, to the chair, followed by Ted Daniels. And speakers are reminded that they have 5 minutes to speak, and I'll give a little warning at 4 minutes, and then there's 5 minutes for questions thereafter.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors, for an opportunity to speak. You've probably received some written stuff from me. 5 minutes isn't long enough. Local government is at a crossroads with the change of government, with the reforms and the legislation already put in place by the last government. And my concern is whether it's going to be local and whether it's going to be democratic. There's many things that that I haven't really got time to go over. But first of all, I'd like to say the contention that Councillor Vandervis is racist is utterly ridiculous. I've known him from at least from 2011. We have other interests in common besides local government. I've never ever heard him denigrate anybody on the basis of their ancestry or background or anything like that. There's
Point of order, Mr Chair.
Sorry, your microphone, please.
We have a code of conduct process underway, and I wonder that it's inappropriate for that to be addressed in public forum. I would defer to the chief on that.
Chief?
Mr Mayor, I didn't refer to the code of conduct complaint.
Yes. So I'll uphold the point of order in that referring to matters that are involved in a code of conduct when it is councillors present who have to determine it. So it's inappropriate to be presenting and discussing matters that may be construed as trying to influence that judgment, which will come later on, because that process is in train and there's still an investigation underway. So at the end of the day, councillors will determine the outcome of that. So I think it's important to keep your comments to things that don't directly address the kinds of issues that are involved in that investigation and complaint. Thank you. But
I also referred to free speech. Obviously that citizens have a right to free speech and councillors have an obligation to freely speak. I've also presented a point of view from Professor Elizabeth Rata, who traces the interpretation of the treaty through a number of years. Okay, so I entirely support what Councillor Vandervis. I'm sorry, I've actually got quite considerable back pain at the moment. I actually support what Councillor Vandervis has, the views he's expressed as a councillor at the meetings, and I think that there's a
point of order.
yeah, look, I think we're getting back into the territory, and so it's quite difficult for you to come and express support or your point of view for something that is is part of a process currently. So I think it's inappropriate.
Mr Mayor, accept your ruling. I'd like to refer to another thing that I put in my written document, and this is a legal opinion, and I think it's actually a correct interpretation of the law, that local government has no obligations under the Treaty of Waitangi. Those obligations lie with the Crown alone. So I just want to refer to some of the documents I've sent you regarding your relationships with local Maori. The Local Government Act has three basic principles.
Point of order.
What is your point of order, Councillor?
Mr. Chairman, the standing orders of the organisation apply to us. They apply, as I understand it, also to people submitting at the public forum. You made a clear ruling, and Ms. Yeldon is litigating that. I think you need to support your own ruling by not allowing that behaviour.
Well, I don't, yeah, and so I'm not upholding that point of order because Ms. Yeldon is talking about the Treaty of Waitangi and the principles thereof, which is a separate issue, albeit a topical one at the moment, but I think it's reasonable for someone in public forum to discuss such an issue. Carolyn?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to comment that I think it's entirely appropriate for a member of the public to come to council forum and voice their concerns if they think that the council is not complying with the law. I will leave it at that and ask you to look at the written documents I've submitted. Thanks.
Thank you for your submission. Now, are there any questions? We have no questions, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next speaker at public forum is Mr. Ted Daniels, who will speak to us about heritage buildings. Also a topical subject.
Good morning. It's a subject I saw in the paper. It's on the agenda, so probably a lot is probably already talked about, but I thought I'd like to do a little sum up of things which are quite relevant at the moment. So, and it's of course the demolition of our heritage. What seems to be an ongoing factor. So we already lost so much of our heritage, so we end up with very little left. So we should be very careful how we gonna deal with losing more heritage, or having developers to actually acknowledge that they should fill in all the empty spaces we have. Because we got a lot of places which can be easily filled in with the appropriate development and green spaces, and not inappropriate buildings as we have happening at the moment in lots of our suburbs, where buildings are taken away and other buildings put up which are not really in keeping with the streetscape or the neighborhood. So I think that there should be a lot more talk about that, and especially the one in Stewart Street, what's on its way at the moment, is something what has shown that there's a lot of opposition to it. So and it's actually shows if we could have heritage and streetscapes and neighborhoods, if people want to do change to take a building away, that it should be like a resource consent, and notified resource consent, or like we have for trees, like the listed trees, you have to go through a resource consent to take away a listed tree. So to me, heritage and streetscapes should fall under the same thing. So, like if you took a heritage building away, is probably worse than taking a tree away. But it's still a heritage tree or a listed tree was a reason why it was listed. So, but the Stewart Street thing will show like a precedent of what can happen. So if it could make that we end up with even more demolition, because the people, the developers keep on buying heritage buildings because they're kind of cheap. So and a lot of people don't know what to do with them, and the complexity of actually making to work, it's very unaffordable for a lot of people. So there should be like a lot more help from the council, just simple things to make people want to redo a heritage building. So like some incentives to make heritage buildings to be affordable, and also make that developers wouldn't even want to touch a heritage building. So it's kind of a shame we already lost so much, and if you look already like last year in just 1 year's time, where we all like lost most of Redway Street, we lost all the buildings in Princess Street, which have been for more than 25 years been people trying to get something done, but nothing is done. So we really need some strong things that developers are not able to go and let our buildings disappear. So it's kind of we just need to keep our heritage. So it's and they have so many opportunities to. Sorry, we lose opportunities to make them work.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
Sorry.
That's your 5 minutes, and thank you very much, Mr. Daniels. We have a question from Councillor Wiley.
Mr. Daniels, do you think, and I can think of several heritage buildings where the inside of the heritage building is not fit for purpose anymore, but using the outer shell, the facades, and building a more appropriate modern building inside, and sort of trying to keep those features as it goes up, and having higher height restrictions to allowing increased development on that site? Because the issue that I'm hearing is that in some cases the amount of money required to do up a building that's currently a two-storey one is impractical, where if you said, okay, we're going to make this a four-storey, it then becomes a practical development, and it creates the win-win. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, I think there's huge possibilities with it, and it's just a matter of being a little bit creative in creating a building with some new parts, but also saving some of the old. I'm not suggesting that we should keep the building as it was exactly, but there's some really good developments where you can have an old building with still some of the character and some of the certain things from the inside, but they're still being modernized to cope with the new requirements of people. So and adding a story or 2 stories to a building can be a good idea. I've done it to my building. So and as long as you do it properly, so like you can easily put an extra 2 stories on, but you step them back so they not become visible from the street, or detract from the streetscape. But every building in every case is different. So there should be no rule saying yes or no for everything. Each heritage building should be looked at on its own merit. And I think that's a thing what we really should work on, is that we open for debate on how we can make those buildings to work, and the city should also talk to those building owners who are leaving the buildings empty and do nothing. How can the city help? and tell them also that they have a responsibility to look after the building and do something with it, something positive for the city, and not waiting till it's gone, too far gone, or in their opinion too far gone, because often even a building like my stand-up building would have been bulldozed because most people would have said it was too far gone. So because it was in a pretty bad state. So but any building can be refinished. So and it's possible to have a building what most engineers would say from it's too far gone. It's ready for the demolition. But it's if it's a building what is part of the streetscape, the council should really be a lot more careful not to let it happen. So like the described bookshop in St. David Street in the north end. That building is gone, and it was a beautiful corner building. So and it's just incredible that it just disappeared, and now it's a car park. But the council had stopped them while they were halfway in the process of demolishing, because they were not allowed to demolish it. But then at the end allowed them to demolish the rest. So but the rest was actually still very salvageable. So the council should be much stronger in making building owners, when they do the wrong thing, to actually get them to fix it. So and reuse part of the building in a new build.
So thank you. That's all we have time for questions, although I've got 4 seconds for a very yes or no question. Are you suggesting that we have some better rules to enable developers to redevelop heritage buildings in a creative way? That's a yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you.
They should redevelop.
Thank you. No, that's a yes. I think because we're done for time, and I'm sorry, Councillor.
Thanks for letting me talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation. Now, just before we move on to the council meeting proper, I'd just like to note that last week, the 25th of January, was Robbie Burns' birthday, and we have a significant statue and a memorial in our octagon for him. And so I'd like to thank everyone involved in the delivery of 2 different Burns suppers here in Dunedin, and I think it was a great celebration of Robbie Burns' birthday, and it reinforces and reminds us of our Scottish heritage that we have in the city. And a lot of that Scottish heritage is reflected in the Scottish baronial architecture that we have around the city. And so we have a lot of witches' hats on buildings, just normal residential buildings throughout Dunedin, which is a reflection of that Scottish heritage. So I think there's much to enjoy about that Scottish heritage in Dunedin. Moving on to the meeting, apologies. I have an apology from Kevin Gilbert. He was not in the country, and apologies for lateness from Councillor Lafisa. So I move the council accepts those 2 apologies. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Wiley. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Confirmation of agenda. You have the agenda in front of you now. Hopefully we all have Wi-Fi. So I move the council confirms the agenda without addition or alteration. Do I have a seconder for that? Deputy Mayor Lucas. Any comments? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Declarations of interest, item number 5. Members are reminded of the need to stand aside from decision making when a conflict might arise between their role as an elected representative and any other private or external interest they might have. Are there any changes or updates to the register? We have none. Therefore, I move that the council notes the elected members' register and confirms the proposed management plan for elected members' interests, and notes the proposed management plan for executive leadership team's interest. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Walker. Any comment? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 6, confirmation of minutes from the ordinary council meeting of 5 December 2023. I move that council confirms the public part of the minutes of that meeting as a correct record. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Houlihan. Are there any comments? There are none. Therefore, I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 6.2, I move that council confirms the public part of the minutes of the ordinary council meeting on 12 December 2023. Do I have a seconder for that? Deputy Mayor Lucas. Any comments? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Reports. Item number 7 on our agenda, actions from resolutions of council meetings. The Chief will speak to the report if required. Do you have any comments?
Happy to take any questions, Mr. Mayor.
Do we have any questions from the actions of resolutions of council meetings? Deputy Mayor Lucas? No? Self-answered. Any other questions? We have none. Therefore, I move that council notes the open and completed actions from resolutions of council meetings as attached to your agenda. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Mayhem. Any further questions? Any comments? Therefore, I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Item 8, the Forward Work Programme for Council, January 2024. Any comments, Chief?
No, but I'm happy to take questions.
Any questions? Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the updated forward work program that we were given yesterday, it hasn't got a page number. It just mentions there's a shared pathway, and in it mentions that there is a strategic pedestrian and cycleway network master plan, and that the report will come in mid-2024. And I just wonder about the timing around that, given that we'll be making some LTP decisions about investment in pedestrian and cycleways. What does mid-2024 mean?
I'm looking to Mr. McLean, but I suspect, given the look he's given me, I'm not sure. What I will do is provide an update for you at the February meeting, and if it does require consideration for the LTP, we'll make sure that it's ready for the May meetings.
I guess the reason I'm asking is that we have a lot of community boards that have requested cycleways. I can think of 3 just off the top of my head, so I just wonder about that work aligning.
So we'll do our best to make sure that it does align, or at least council have the right information in front of them during the deliberation process.
Any further questions? We have none. Therefore, I'll move that council notes the updated council forward work program as shown in attachment A. Do I have a seconder for that? Deputy Mayor Lucas. Are there any comments? In which case I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 9. The significant forecasting assumptions for the 10-year plan. Do we have Mr. Davey and Ms. Bodecker? To the chair, please. Are there any opening comments?
No, just happy to take questions.
Where are my questioners? Councillor Barker.
Just given that the Bill report was kind of based on September statistics, and there have been changes since then, will we get an update report to inform the assumptions?
I am not aware that there is going to be another Bill report update, and they're treating this as the final.
In the report, it did say that they were going to putting a final report in October. So I'm just trying to find the page for that. Sorry, it was buried way in the depth, and I think I asked the CEO about it yesterday. Said that there was going to be some final numbers or something in October. So that's why I was wondering. And then it said there was going to be another report in February. I'm just because we're basing our assumptions on these reports, I just want to know whether there's going to be an update. That might be a question mark. Update and release. Okay, so it was page 92, and it said we will be updating and releasing the final cost adjusters in October 2023. So that was my wondering about whether there'd been any changes since then and whether we would expect any, because in the report it also talks about the global outlook, and there's been significant changes since then, where it's talking about that supply chains are fine, and now we've had 2 wars since then and a change of government. So I'm just wondering, and I guess...
Oh, beg your pardon, sorry. I was going to say, these adjusters that came through that we're looking at are the October 2023 ones. I will follow up to see if there's anything further to come, but I'm not aware that there is.
And what I would add is these are the figures that have been used nationally as the base figures, but they come with an inherent degree of uncertainty. But I think that is captured in when you look at how the significant forecasting assumptions are expressed in the document. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the page because I've lost my Wi-Fi, so I'm relying. I know, oh, the irony. So the significant forecasting assumptions do show that the level of uncertainty is high for a great many things when we've made them. So I think that we've acknowledged that it is uncertain and explained the effects of that uncertainty, but I think there's not much more we can do in that regard.
So I just want to be clear, so we've been asking to approve for the purposes of developing the 10-year plan and consulting with the community the significant forecasting assumptions. So it's 6 months till we actually adopt the annual plan. Would we be able to change those assumptions in the meantime? Is that usual, or do we usually sit with what we decide in January?
If there were changes, significant changes, we would bring them back to you, definitely.
The next question's on page 63. It's about the fixed asset valuations, and it's got a low level of uncertainty, and then it talks about revaluations. The effects of the uncertainty is revaluations are significantly different from the forecast, which impact depreciation. And given that we've had unbalanced budgets for the last couple of years, and I think those were actually severely impacted by a revaluation, why was it the level of uncertainty low? Is that because we've just had a revaluation and that is solid?
For the purposes of the 10-year plan, we've based it on our revaluations. We will have them done every 3 years or every year for certain assets. We think what we've got is solid at the moment.
And my next question is just a question about the cumulative change. What's that page? Oh, I've got page 35. That must be page 35 of their report, which is, so I'm just going to find it, page 107 of ours. And it's talking, because this report was done without water infrastructure, which is kind of scary. But on the water infrastructure only table where they've got the cost adjuster, there's a part of the table has a cumulative change, and I was just looking at the cumulative change and wondering from 2023, which is the 1,000, and then in 2034 it's 1,342, and they've got 34.2% cumulative change. Does that mean that our water infrastructure will be 34% more expensive in 2034? What's the interpretation of the meaning of that?
When we apply the inflation factors to our own estimates, we do not inflation adjust year one. So we make our 2024-25 year 1,000, if you like, as our baseline. So we will start inflation adjusting our second year of the 10-year plan. So over the 10-year period at the end of 2034, we will have inflation adjusted our water infrastructure assets by 21.3%.
Okay, so that means they're a fifth more expensive in 10 years. Excellent, thank you. Thanks for the maths.
Very good. I've got a couple of little questions. Page, where am I? Golly. 77. We have a graph there, which is a nice visual graph of value and volume in terms of retail sales, the fact that there is quite a divergence now in those graphs, would it be fair to say that that is an indication of consumers' purchasing power? So it is the divergence in those two graphs shows by how much the purchasing power of people has decreased. So they can buy much less with their money. So in other words, it's much more difficult to manage on the income they have.
What they have graphed here is what they have measured in the economy. I can't answer your question
Okay.
as to why.
So also on page 66, this is a forecast of interest rates or cost of funds. Yes, interest rates. We've got a dip over the next few years and then projected to rise thereafter. Is that, and that's for the DCC group, does that come from long tail on borrowings that stretch out into the future, or does that come from your expectation that interest rates in New Zealand will rise after 2027?
This forward-looking cost of funds is the cost of funds for the group, which changes month by month, but the fall in 2027 largely relates to the expected easing cycle where the Reserve Bank's expected to cut interest rates, and that will should affect our forward-looking cost of funds to reduce over the next few years. And then after that, it really reflects that in a normal yield curve environment, interest rates normally get higher the further out you go. So it reflects that looking forward.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Davey, given there's been comment in the past about supply chain issues and Middle East conflict, I wondered if you had any comment that you might proffer on the issue of the disruption to shipping from the attacks on shipping recently, and then the escalation of conflict in the Middle East, which of course is part of that is the attack on Gaza by Israel, but escalating even yesterday, the attack on the base in Jordan, on the American base in Jordan. Would you have any comment based on previous experiences globally, how that might influence or change our assumptions?
Those news developments day by day affect interest rates day by day and are already reflected in interest rates that have changed since those events have occurred. So they will affect our forward-looking cost of funds month by month and so on, and are reflected in interest rates that we use to calculate these forward-looking cost of funds.
And I guess I'm thinking too, thank you for that, and there's always the ifs, if the Middle Eastern conflict was to escalate even more, what would we see as the impact of that, would you hypothesise?
I would say that it would be inflationary, and higher inflation leads to higher interest rates. But these events happen on an ongoing basis and do impact interest rates on an ongoing basis.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm dealing with two different electronic versions at the moment. Okay. On page 9 of the bill report, you've got the global supply chain pressure index, and it looks to me like that has almost passed in terms of it's peaked and it's coming back down again. Would that be an agreement?
That looks to be correct based off that graph, yes.
And then questioning, if you go to the LGCI graphs that are further down and look at all of the, all of the costs, they all seem to be rising at around about 2.5%. I'm just going to get further down to so that's the graphs that are at the bottom, page 37 on in that report. And it seems to me that you can see the inflationary effect of supply chain there in the last of the actual curves, but it's not as big as I anticipated it would be. Is that really it? Because it's deviated away from the line, but it doesn't appear I would have thought all those would have been affected by supply chain inflation.
I can't comment on those graphs.
I guess actually it's back to the Chief or maybe Mr. Ward. Has that, if you look at water, sewer drainage and water services PPI indexes, so that's figure 12, and it's just an earth-moving site works right underneath it. There doesn't seem to be a huge amount of deviation in that consumer index, even during this period of incredibly high inflation. So has that been our experience as well or not? Are we different from what's in those figures?
Sorry, we just page, are you 38? Is that the one you're on?
I've got the public version, I don't know the 38 on the report.
Okay. So, Mr. Ward? So, just catching up with you.
Which is page 98 of our papers.
Yep, 98 of the papers.
Really?
Is it? Not 110, I think.
110, I think.
This page copy.
110.
Yeah, I make it 110.
It's honestly, it's a relatively minor point. What I'm saying is we're having the dialogue that inflation has had incredible effects on all of these production costs, and then when we look at this, you can see it there, but it has not made the line go crazy up. So it just seems to be a disparity in what was being shown here and the narrative as to what inflation has actually done to our costs.
I wonder, though, that the cost pressures we've seen are reflected in the graph. If you look, there's quite a sharp rise where the graph, and I can't read the years because I've got borrowed glasses as well, I am. See how it's quite sharp between 22 and 24 and then flattens off. And I think what we're feeling at the minute is that rise that's happened in the last year or two.
Oh, there's no doubt that's it. But I actually thought it was bigger based on the dialogue than what we've got. And then I just wanted to finish with a question comment. At that rate, that's roughly 2.5%, my calculations, and you pretty much answered it earlier on, within 10 years at that rate, you're going to get a 20% increase in the cost of doing the job. Cool. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. And like Councillor O'Malley, it's sort of a question comment, and I think it speaks to the previous questions. So to both of you, actually, we obviously need assumptions to plan. That's correct, but isn't it fair that we all understand that assumptions are that very thing? They're assumptions, and they're, to a certain extent, it's always crystal ball gazing. It's always a moment in a snapshot in time, and it's always potentially internationally and domestically subject to change, whether that be government policy uncertainty domestically or internationally, conflicts like the Middle East conflict expanding and or another COVID-like event. So I'm asking it's just a snapshot in time, but we need the assumption, obviously.
That is correct. We need to prepare our plan based on assumptions.
Yes, and also to add to that, the interest rate assumptions are assumptions of the whole yield curve at a point in time, which will be subject to change.
Very good. Deputy Mayor Lucas.
Thank you. And following on, I mean, we clearly need assumptions, but at what point between now and when we adopt the plan at the beginning of July, I mean, how significant a change, whether it be to interest rates or legislation or whatever, how significant a change will it have to be for us to actually change our assumptions? Because, I mean, you know, anything around the margins is obviously not worth, because it's a big job to change our budget. So, I mean, how significant a change will it require us to revisit our assumptions between now and then?
I think if there was a particular event that took place 3 years ago when we had COVID, we revisited our assumptions. So if there was another event of some sort, we would look at them again.
And if I just add, broadly, the assumptions, you know, for them to be impacted, it would take something like a global pandemic. And then, and as you know, we will, with the budgets, apply these numbers to the capital program as the inflators. But at any point in the 10-year plan cycle, so during an annual plan, we can revisit them as well if the financial situation has changed.
Any further questions? Thank you. Thank you very much for answering all those. So at this point, I'll move that the council approves, for the purposes of developing the 10-year plan and consulting with the community, these significant forecasting assumptions in attachment A that you've all read. Seconded, Councillor Wiley. And in speaking to this, I'd like to come back to the Burl report, which does make a comment in the conclusions, close to where we were looking a minute ago. Golly. And the conclusion was that times are very tough. There's been a significant erosion of consumer purchasing power, and the ability of the economy to recover is severely limited by supply chain restrictions. So I haven't got that page just here. However, I think that one of the assumptions that we have is that we will be getting less money from central government in one of the critical large expenditure items of infrastructure, namely roading and transport, so the roads and footpaths. And we've already had signalled that there'll be a reduction in fare rate and a reduction in central government funding for that. However, that is an area where there has been strong government dictums and suggestions and even mandates as to what we should spend money on. But the other one, the elephant in the room, is the three waters, because there have been new regulations, and there's a strong mandate from central government that we increase our spend markedly in three waters, and indeed we are doing that, as are most territorial authorities throughout the country. However, there has not been any money to accompany that, and I think that is and now is a timely moment through this year and the next to have a good conversation with central government about what should be funded from central government, what should be funded from local, and where responsibilities and accountability lies, because responsibility and accountability has been passed on to us, but without the accompanying funding. So I think it'll be a good time to have a good conversation about that, and and go back to first principles as to who's paying for what, who's doing what, and where does the fairness lies. Because I believe that New Zealanders have an innate sense of fairness. That's one of the reasons why we had a lot of settlers arrive in this country, to be able to have some land and place of their own and take ownership of their situation. But they are very aware of the fairness of income distribution and the costs that flow through our community. And this is the part of the puzzle that we will be working through with our 10-year plan, as to who pays for what and how much it's going to cost. So, do I have a seconder? So, who's my speaker? Next speaker is Councillor Barker. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I had a good read of the Bill report, and I guess my concern was that it was now out of date, like everything is. I guess the only thing constant is change, and that was why I was questioning about whether we can change the assumptions. Since the Bill report, of course, we've had the Israel-Palestine conflict, the Suez Canal issues, ongoing COVID variations, and of course the change in the government, and the signalled government spending cuts, plus the flooding in the North Island, where there's going to be a lot of council, that was in there, a lot of council money going into. So that's why I was asking about whether the assumptions could change throughout the process, because I think that we do live in a very changing world. But the LGA does tell us that we need to make the law tells us that we have to make these assumptions about our sources of funds. So I've looked very carefully through attachment A, and I agree with the levels of uncertainty and the effects of the uncertainty, and I think we can confidently go out to consultation with these. The question that I asked about the fixed asset valuations and why the level of uncertainty was low, because we've had a huge impact on our last few years' budgets with running unbudgeted budgets, I guess, where we had severe impacts on our depreciation, which is now affecting our abilities going forward. So I did question why that was low, but I guess I'm satisfied that we had the revaluations quite recently, and that was over the three waters. So I think that that is very sensible. A lot of these things are actually just outside our control, but they do affect our ability to run our organisation. And I think the Bill report's really useful when we're looking at everything we do in council. Anyway, they talked about what's happening in the world, about world growth slowing, that migration was really the only thing driving the growing economy in New Zealand, about the supply chain disruptions, which affects things like actually city forests, etc. And that what we had here, experts are certain that economic activity will be slow and persistently high core inflation remains a major risk to the global economy. And I think the key thing I took out of here is it is hard to overstate the amount of volatility that has been observed in economic data post-COVID. And I think that's the real learning from this, is that when we're making these assumptions, is that they may change and we need to be able to change with them.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. I agree with a lot of what Councillor Barker has just said. A lot of this is outside of our control. When I look at the Bill report, I actually feel that there's some conservative predictions going forward. They've stated the facts of what's taken place up to that snapshot in time, but I'm quite concerned about it, how conservative they are looking forward. Central government has an important role to play. And I think that's going to be where we really have to maintain the pressure. I am very concerned about the costs increasing, especially around infrastructure spend and supply and demand of services in that area. We're not the only council around the country that is going to be needing this work to be done. We can see that throughout the media. I doubt there is a council in the country that has not got Three Waters or any other infrastructure work not high on their list of things to do. I found the conclusion of the report actually quite interesting, and I thought the last sentence of the last paragraph, first sentence, the key risk for local government remains higher than normal price increases, but the worst seems to be over for now. I'm sorry, I don't quite share their optimism. You know, that's a very bold statement to make, knowing what's ahead of us and the information that we've received so far. Thank you.
Councillor Vandervis.
I very much welcome this detailed report on significant forecasting assumptions. To have the Bill report backing it up is certainly helpful as well, but I very much like the way that the assumptions have been laid out, how clear they are, levels of uncertainty and reasons for uncertainty. To me, this is a really very helpful document that we need to keep in mind when we're making decisions on future spending. There were a couple of things that I did wonder about. Chief Executive Graham has just now highlighted the uncertainty level of a number of different assumptions that is quite high. And I think that that's a very timely thing to suggest. One thing that I find possibly problematic is the first assumption, which is on page 61, where it says it's assumed that levels of service will be maintained. And this assumption is also again highlighted on page 64, where it says that investing in renewals of the network to ensure that levels of service are maintained. The assumption that we're going to be able to maintain levels of service over the next 10 years, given that we've already had an unbalanced budget and maybe looking at another one, to me is an assumption which I don't think we can afford. The financial constraints that we already know about and have numbers on suggest that we are not going to be able to afford to maintain all the levels of service that we have in the past. And if we look at some of the potential big clouds on the horizon in terms of the quantum of costs that we know are coming, but we don't really know the size of, there are quite a large number of those as well. The way I see it, we have a level of debt now that utterly constrains not only what we hope to do, but what we have been able to do in the past. The level of debt now, and I think the assumption in here that we will be paying roughly 5% on that extraordinarily high debt for the foreseeable future is a quite reasonable assumption. 5% on $1 billion, if you look at the entire debt that council and council-controlled organisations have, and that is getting bigger rapidly, is a very significant hole in our bucket. And as a result, the assumption that we can maintain existing levels of service, I don't think is one that A, we should advertise, and B, we should expect. I think we need to actively look at levels of service which we could reduce in order to be able to make our budgets balance, because unbalanced budgets are unsustainable. Our financial policy says that we should have sustainable budgets. We didn't last year, and for us to continue to do that, to me, is unreasonable. So, very happy with this report, but wonder if the assumption that we're going to keep the existing levels of service maintained is one that perhaps should be modified, and perhaps Chief Executive might have some whether it should be, and if so, how we go about that.
Very good. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you. We're all obviously cognizant of the fact that the LGA requires us to produce these significant forecasting assumptions for the development of our long-term plan. But for me, I mean, as I alluded to in the questions, the clues in the word assumptions, and it is a snapshot in time, it is a best guess, it is crystal ball gazing. And I won't repeat what others have said. I mean, there are threats obviously out there domestically and internationally, and they've all been well traversed. But I just would like to sort of say something in defence of both Mr. Davey and Ms. Bodecker, just by pointing out if they were able to comprehensively answer all the questions we raised, they certainly wouldn't be working for this organisation. They would be living as billionaires on a tax-free haven somewhere. Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to start by quoting MIT Professor Paul Samuelson, which is a fairly well-known quote, which is, economists have accurately predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions. And I also want to quote Paul Krugman, who used to refer to in a lot of his economic analysis to the confidence fairy. Business confidence is low, business confidence is high, and he pointed out that that's a non-quantitative statement about emotional responses to the situation in front of you. And we need to be very careful, because I think we are facing this. There's an emotional response going through all the councils and the government at the moment to the debt that we are facing, and we've got to get it back to a rational response. If you look at the Bill report, supply chain constraints are starting to pass. Inflation overseas is starting to drop. Now, while there might be continuing events that could impact on that, you can either go to the worst case scenario and keep adding them all up and recognising that the end of the world is coming, or you can recognise that some will happen and some won't happen, and the average will probably much average out. And that's where you go back to the LGCI graphs and you look at the history of the world for the last 20 years and the impact of that on that curve, and it's pretty minor. But that curve is rising at an inexorable 2.5% per annum. And that means if you wait 10 years to do something, you're going to get a 20% increase in the cost of doing it, which gets you back to the adage for capital.
Point of order. I believe that that last statement misrepresents the facts, and it's one that we hear around council often. The fact is that if you have an inflation rate of 2.5%,
What is
misrepresentation.
But
If you have an inflation rate of 2.5%, then it's certain that the number of dollars that you are going to pay down the track is going to be higher. But it's also certain that those dollars are going to be worth exactly that much less.
Mr. Mayor, he's not talking about the point.
Whoa. Golly, we're just...
So therefore, it's not actually an argument for doing things now because it's cheaper now.
Right. Okay, I've got it. We just, hold it, we're just quiet, please. We'll just take a couple of minutes here to confer. So I move that we just adjourn for a couple of minutes. Seconded, Councillor Walker. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. We'll have a comfort stop as well. We ready to resume? It appears so. Thank you. And now, firstly, to the point of order, I will not uphold the point of order. I think it's perfectly reasonable for a member to make their own assessments of the data in front. And so I don't think we want to, whilst this may be called a debate, it's actually just speaking to the motion. So we don't want to be getting into debates about various people's interpretations of it and what they want to say. So moving right along, do you have anything, do you wish to be a speaker? Yes, thank you. Do you have anything further to say, Councillor O'Malley?
Yeah, I'm still in the middle of it.
Yes.
So, thanks.
Carry on.
So supply chain construction looks like it's passing. Now, we know that the East Coast recovery is going to have a major impact on government money and supply to councils. In the previous government, the indication was, though, that would end up being a separate, when it comes to transport, it'll end up being a separate fund, and it looks like it will probably still have to be a separate fund, otherwise it's going to affect the National Land Transport Fund dramatically. So I think that although it sits out there, it would be better for us to keep just going as we go, knowing that that's there and it may impact us. And this is the issue of what impacts you, what's the probability of it is important, because whether you pay attention, whether you actually respond to that risk, is dependent on whether you believe it's going to happen or not. I don't believe, though, that we can expect any funding from central government to help us out with any of this, because we weren't getting it from the previous government to help us out with this, and it's very unlikely that this government's going to be any more generous. So I think we have to acknowledge then that it's going to land back on us. I remind you that when we built this stadium here, it was about 300 million, and Christchurch is quoting 680 million for the same size stadium only 15 years later. That's the impact of inflation and continuing cost increases as we go along. So I know that we are worried as we're going into this about our debt that we are achieving as we go forward on this. But remember, if we defer something that we have to do, we are only going to end up being hit harder again in the future. And so the best time to deal with it is now. We are going to see a large rates increase, but ours is including the curbside pickup in it, and none of the other cities are putting theirs in it, and theirs are still going to be bigger than ours because they are further back on the line for investing in Three Waters than we are, because we luckily started the investment up 4 to 5 years ago. So I think we've just got to keep in mind that if we pull back now, we could create problems for the future. So going forward, it's going to have to be a balance to what ratepayers can afford, but also make sure we are not deferring, because in many respects, this budget is quite literally, we are receiving the deferrals of previous councils, and we cannot hand this on to another council in the future. So it's going to be that balance. It's going to be a tough budget, but I think we can get through it.
Good. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Yes, I was going to agree with some of the things Councillor O'Malley was saying, actually, because anyone who's studied finances or property or any sort of thing realises that there's a natural cycle. They all go up and they go down, and it is very normal. So these things we're seeing, while it's not great to see, forecasts that look doom and gloom, or, which obviously the impacts we're having on the international markets and everything else in our, it has a flow on, because we're such a global, we're affected all the time by the global impacts and conflicts, and the volatility of those situations does impact on us and obviously the rates. All of that, though, is normal and does have, it's a regular cycle. You see it in history everywhere, that things go up and down. But we have to get through this. And so it's not going to be easy. And when you listen to what everybody's saying, everybody keeps repeating it's a cost of living crisis. And that's what we've got, is a cost of living crisis, because everybody's saying it, it's been created, and that's what it is. And people are finding it hard, and it's something we're going to find very, very hard as well when we go to set these budgets, is that the budgets we're looking at are going to be higher than normal, but we're not the only ones. As everybody's said before, there's no point me repeating all of this, but every other council in the country is facing this. So these assumptions are right. There's costs being cut everywhere, the Waka Kotahi funding, and a lot of people rely on that. A lot of the councils have relied on it, and it helps them get a lot of the work done. So that's going to impact and have a lot more costs, rates increases, everything that a household has, councils have, but in much, much higher amounts. So we are going to see budgets that are, where we are seeing budgets that are higher, and that flows through, and it's going to have an impact on rates. There's no doubt about it. So I'd say to the public, get ready. You're not going to like it. None of us are going to like it, but it's going to be a higher rate than what anyone would want. But we have to, nobody wants it, but things are looking tough. However, it's not going to last forever. It's a cycle, and we will get through this.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just have a brief comment to make, and I do agree around the cycle in history, but I think the difference at the moment is the uncertainty caused by central government in taking apart and stopping many things, but with nothing in its place. And if we take Three Waters, for our community, they are very confused about what this means for them. We understand to a larger degree what it means for our community, but our community doesn't necessarily understand that in terms of the impact. And there's no doubt these are volatile times. The one thing I would remind colleagues about is that we navigated a global pandemic, and we navigated it with the idea of investing in our community, and I hope that we will look forward basing it on the assumptions we have, and that we will navigate that again with confidence. And the comfort we have, if we can call it that, as other colleagues have said, is that other councils all over the country, as I drove in this morning, I heard about Wellington's woes yet again. And aren't we thankful we have invested in our city already, and we don't have fountains of water? That we have made that investment, but we need to continue. So that is some comfort that all councils are experiencing this, and we just need to remember those things. Happy to thank the staff for their considerable work in bringing this report to us.
Any other speakers? Very good. So just a couple of things to say. I'll just refer firstly to the point that Councillor O'Malley made on page 117. The line is steeper when we look at the total indices of forecasting values, and in particular because the Three Waters line is quite a bit steeper and the transport line is quite a bit steeper. I also refer to the conclusion of the Bill report on page 108 that the high inflationary environment has eroded the purchasing power of consumers, be it households or organisations. And one of the another comment that is also shown in the report on page 64 is from staff that variations to the timing and cost of the capital expenditure program may require changes to levels of services and or an increase in revenue. So it may be that both of those, well, definitely both of those will be examined as much as possible. And going back to my original point, it is timely to have a discussion with central government about the funding mechanisms for this, because one thing that is happening and has been happening in Dunedin is that we're getting on with Three Waters improvements and renewals and restoration of pipes and facilities throughout the city. And the biggest question is how will we fund that on an ongoing basis? So that is a discussion that we will have in the first instance, and then later in the year I hope that we will have some discussions about that with central government. So having said that, I'll now put the motion that we approve for the purposes of developing the 10-year plan these forecasting assumptions. The motion is shown on the screen behind me, I think, yes. All those in favour, say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 10. Building owner incentives for sustainability, earthquake strengthening and heritage conservation. We have a report. Mr. West, Dr. Johnson and Ms. Brown. Are there any prefacing comments before we go to questions?
No, I think we'll just go straight to questions.
Are there any questions? Any questions? We have no questions. All is revealed in the report. Thank you very much. That was as brief as it can be. That being the case, I'll move that Council notes the building owner incentives report. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Mahan. Would anyone like to speak to it? Councillor Barker.
Are you going to speak first, or are you just happy that I speak?
I'm happy that you speak.
Okay. I had a good read of this, and I think that since the motion was put forward, when was that? March 2023, we spent the good part of the year building the Heritage Action Plan, and one of the key outcomes of that was around the incentivising of building owners for the earthquake strengthening, reuse, etc., and we actually worked with the building owners. We had, including Ted, who was here earlier, on the advisory group, and we also did a survey in which 76 building owners replied back to the survey, and they came up with a lot of ideas. So I think that since this has gone through, we've actually got a whole lot of work in progress, and I note that the Heritage Action Plan, was it an appendix or part of the in the attachment A, had 5 actions in it, but there was actually another 7 that we could identify that worked towards looking at how we can incentivise these inner city vacant inner city spaces. Also the other work that we do, like investing in streetscapes, e.g. The famous Vogel Street area, the heritage advisory staff, signage and interpretation, and inspiring people and showing adaptive reuse and what we can actually do. And we need to obviously get better at telling these stories, but I note that it was Councillor Benson Pope that moved this, and I hope that he's feeling satisfied that we've gone through a good process this year with the Heritage Action Plan to try and tease out some of these things, even though we haven't got to the answer yet. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Benson Pope.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad this has finally hit the table. It has taken a year, though, and I think it's essential that in addition to the work that's been alluded to as part of the Heritage Action Plan, because there's a lot of crossover here, that this work has progressed. I don't think we should have any doubt about the importance of what's being discussed here, especially in the context of Mr. Daniel's comments earlier, and because he strayed into other matters current, I sat back and I was unable to ask a more specific question about his development, because while he's to be complimented for his own performance around heritage protection, there was a regime earlier that was much more extensive than is currently in place, with rent holidays, delays, rates, rebate, or adjustments to rating to also provide incentives, and that was changed because of an audit requirement about how we funded, and I think that's something that needs to be investigated. I've raised it in other location, other fora recently, but I think the quiver of what's available to us has been somewhat restricted by forces other than our own decisions, and this, in the context of the discussions about the wider budget, it's really important that we don't retrench around the possibilities we have to improve our city further. We know from the discussions in the second generation plan hearings that there is a significant demand for inner city housing, and doesn't that just align perfectly with the work that has been so successful in George Street? And we need to continue with all those things. That's what is reflected in the general community views, and I'm sure we'll hear it again as part of the imminent hearings on the 10-year plan. People know what makes this city stunning, and if we don't keep keep the foot on the go pedal about those improvements, then we're only going to go backwards.
Very good. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. I'm very grateful that we are looking at incentives for developers and building owners to restore and maintain their heritage buildings. And I think it's really, when you look around our city, some of our buildings are absolutely stunning. And we do have a lot of really high quality, beautiful older buildings. And I think we should aim to keep that, restore it, and it is a treasure to our city. There's no doubt about it. However, what I will say is what I hear from some developers and building owners is that sometimes the red tape can be too much, and it makes it quite difficult for people and costly for people to keep the heritage elements and also make a dollar that means it's profitable for them to maintain the property. So I think we've got to be aware of that and work, and this is what a lot of this is about as well. So that's why I'm really grateful this paper's here, to look at really good effective incentives for building owners to help them move forward, because it is costly often to do up an older building, and it's costly to take on that project. So anywhere we can, it's good if we can help incentivise those options for building owners. Thank you.
Very good. We appear to have exhausted speakers, and so I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 11. The revised meeting schedule.
I'm happy to speak to that, Mr Mayor.
Very good. I know, I was wondering if Mr West was going to come to the chair unexpectedly. But yes, you'll speak to that, Chief.
Or answer any questions, councillors. It's just a revised schedule based on a slight change in the 10-year plan timing.
Are there any questions? Councillor Barker?
Just have one small question. It's just about the timing of things, like when there's two committees on a day, and maybe one of the agendas is quite short. Say there's a meeting at 10 a.m. and the meeting's quite short, and then we have to wait till 1 p.m. Is there an opportunity to schedule them maybe for 10 and 11?
For some committees, yes, but for some, no, because there are independent members on two of the standing committees, and there's a requirement, we think, to give them certainty about when their meeting is likely to start. So we appreciate that these are, for councillors, that can be troublesome, but otherwise, that these are people who have other jobs as well. So.
Yeah, I see those are on the same days often. I was just looking at the customer and regulatory, and then the civic affairs.
We will, those ones we will work, and they'll be advertised to say, like you said, at 11 or immediately following the conclusion of the other. But we also need to try and give the public certainty. So we need to have times in here, but we will work to be as efficient as we can where we can.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Lucas?
Thank you. I note that the grant subcommittee has been moved to July for their hearings, and that's normally in May, and I see how full the month of May is. I'm just concerned about the impact of that, because Councillor Liffey, so maybe I'd answer this. Applications normally close like end of March, and that's quite some time for applicants to wait till July if they've got projects that they're waiting on funding. That's all just the delay till July for those hearings.
I'm happy to follow that up if we just note that there'll be a follow-up on whether the grants process is impacted. It might be to do with confirmation of the budget, I suspect, as well.
Councillor Gary?
Chief, I wonder if you could comment on the audit and risk timing, knowing that for two of those meetings, two members of that committee have a clash. As I assume it's because the chair is coming from out of town?
The times to be confirmed for those, and they're entirely dependent on our audit timeframes. And so we are still waiting to check that the timing of those committee meetings meets the timing required by our auditors.
Okay, I was just looking, and the times, the time in the day looks settled except for one. So I'm assuming that you're taking that all into consideration. Yeah, it is problematic.
Good.
My other question would be, when would the calendar for the LTP process, once this is sorted around, because we do have members of our community asking around submission period.
So once council, we have a draft timetable in the back around all those public-facing dates, but didn't want to predetermine the decision of council, so that will be released in the next day or two.
Very good. I think we're done with questions. Yes, okay. So Councillor Eckler's moved that council approves the revised meeting schedule as attached in the report. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Houlihan. Do you want to speak to it? No. Does anyone want to speak? No. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 12. Approval to grant electricity easement for Aurora at Burnside. Very good. Seconded. All right. I will have any questions. There's no prefacing comments, are there? No. Are there any questions? I hear no questions. I see no questions. Thank you very much. Okay, so the motion has been moved and seconded. Councillor Eklund, would you like to speak to it? Oh, sorry, Councillor Vandervis, yes. No? Would anyone like to speak? In which case I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Resolution to exclude the public. I move the council moves into confidential proceedings and excludes the public for the next part of our meeting. Seconded Councillor Walker. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. So it's only 11:30, so we will exclude the public and make a start.